If I'm not loud.
Just cough if you're not loud.
Good. Good morning, and welcome to another Seize the Day. I trust that you guys had a really good Thanksgiving, and that you guys are ready to begin a whole new week. Thankful for our opportunities that we have to be together, and trust that um, this will be a great week. We just finished celebrating the first Advent in for Christmas this coming Sunday. And as you can tell in the background, we have our Christmas tree up. So that was a feat that took place over this Thanksgiving weekend. One of the, it seems like the tradition now for the past number of years is as we have family that come over, we invite them to come and chop a Christmas tree. Um, and so some of them have never really done that before. So we drive out to one of the tree farms here in New Hampshire, and we all gather around. We walk around until Cindy picks out the tree that she wants, because we're there just for labor, basically. So we're cutting the tree down, carrying the tree, but we have absolutely no say whatsoever into what tree that's going to be found. And my wife, she has this, let's say, like a soft spot for Charlie Brown trees. So, people look for these big, bushy, trees. My wife looks for the ones that nobody else seems to want to bring home. And those are the ones that we get. But by the time you put all the stuff on there, they're turned into this tree of beauty. So she knows what she's doing. So but you know what the other cool thing is? That because all of our families here, they get to help decorate. So all I got to do is cut the tree, put it in its stand, go up in the attic, bring down all of the ornaments and lights and things like that. And then the girls, they go at it. And so as you can see in the background, they did a really good job. So we're grateful for that. This weekend was also a little bit sad. We've been praying for Robert and Cynthia Saloy. They have been faithful watchers here on Seize the Day. Cynthia passed away in her sleep, and we had her graveside service this past week, just a day or so before Thanksgiving. But also this week, we lost Gail Bucco. George and Gail have been coming to Bethany. I think they were coming back in the 90s, because they were a part of Bethany when it was in its former building down in the heart of Rye, New Hampshire. And when we built the new facilities, they moved over in that move. But that's when I became the pastor. So I became the pastor of Bethany back in 2003. So they were here even longer before I was. But George and Gail and Gail, they're in their mid 50s, and Gail, she too passed away in her sleep. It was a shocker to everyone in our faith community. George, so active in our kids ministries for many, many years now, and Gail, well, she helped to run a women's, like a mom-to-mom kind of ministry for young couples, young women having babies. Just so smart, so organized. Really a delightful person. Excellent cook. And she too has passed away. So this has been quite the weekend. And yet, in the midst of all of this, we have a hope that is being accentuated during these years during this season of Advent. And I brought that out on Sunday. I wanted people to recognize that Jesus came because the world is broken. He came into the midst of a world that was deeply troubled, and his desire was to come and shed light in the darkness, to be that light that dawns for those who are living in the shadow of death. That was a prophetic word that was uttered way back in Isaiah chapter 9, verses 1 and 2. And Matthew pulls that out for us in the closing verses of Matthew chapter 4. So this is the work that Jesus has come to do. He has come to bring us this sense of hope and promise. And so I'm thankful that we have a gospel that is worth proclaiming. This past week, I had the opportunity to share with the congregation a story of a woman named Caitlin Phillips. She had been studying abroad in Bali. And while she was in Bali, she was filming a documentary on animal welfare. And as part of that documentary, she filmed this beautiful little octopus that fits in the palm of your hand. It is really very tiny, and it's called a blue ring octopus. And she made a little TikTok video and put it online. And about 3 hours after she had done that, she started getting all these comments about that blue ringed octopus. And what the comments were warning her was that blue ringed octopus was one of the most deadly creatures on the planet. It is so venomous that the venom from that tiny little octopus that literally fit in the palm of her hand had enough venom in it to kill 26 adults. It would cause respiratory arrest and paralysis within minutes. She was so shaken, she called her father in tears. And it's so deceptive, right? Something so small could be so deadly. And it could destroy life. And yet it was so attractive. Where do we hear these kinds of tales before? This isn't just about octopus, right? This is about choices that we make in our lives. This is about the direction in which we set for ourselves. And if we're not careful, instead of enhancing life, it can take life away. And so consequently, I thought that was such an intriguing story. And we went back and we looked at the story of Herod and in the opening chapters, because we wanted to start a new series called Implications. We've just finished looking at the first 4 chapters in the Gospel of Matthew. And in there, Matthew has made a very concerted effort to demonstrate why Jesus is the Messiah, the promised deliverer that God had spoken of many times throughout the Old Testament. And that Jesus was this promised one, the anointed one, the Messiah, the Christ, same name, just one Messiah, Hebrew, the Christ from the Greek word Christos. It means the same. It's the anointed one. This is the Redeemer, the deliverer that God has promised. And so Matthew makes a concerted effort about that. And what he does in his writing is to first go back to Jesus's genealogy to show us that he came in the promises of Abraham and David. Then we also go on and we realize that in the actual events of Jesus's birth, they were fulfilling prophecy. So God's conversation with Joseph about Mary's conception brings us all the way back to Isaiah 7, where we read, "A virgin shall be with child and give birth to a son, and we shall call him Emmanuel." Or his birthplace, when the Magi come and want to know where the King of the Jews has been born, all the Old Testament scholars got together and they said, Bethlehem. And Matthew says that's to fulfill what it says in Micah chapter 5, verse 2, that Bethlehem, the least among the tribes of Judah, out of which will come a ruler and a shepherd for his people. And on and on we went throughout this book, where there were verses from Hosea, passages from the book of Jeremiah, like so many that were just pointing that Jesus is the fulfillment of all this prophetic word, until we finally get to Jesus moving from Nazareth to Capernaum, where he's about to begin his ministry with the words, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is near." And that word that Jesus brings, it also was a fulfillment of a passage that we just opened up with, and that was Isaiah chapter 9, where it says, to those living in darkness, a great light has shone. To those living in the shadow of death, a light has dawned. Jesus is about to bring light into the darkness that is all around us. And that darkness is made up of so much, division and anxiety producing elements all around us. I mean, I stood there just looking at the faces of those who had come to celebrate Cynthia's life. And you could tell those who really did love the Lord. And yet God gave me an opportunity to just share this good news with everyone there at the funeral. And when I went to George's home, the pain that was in his face, but the hope that still reigned within him, that he knew he would see his wife one time again, that this is uncharted territory for him, but she is experiencing the best life ever. It is the hope that we have in Jesus. It is this light that shines in the present and will be seen in all of its glory when we see him face to face. So I moved this discussion then to the experience that we have with Herod. Herod, when he heard the news of Jesus's birth, immediately wanted to find out where the child was born. And he sent the Magi, the wise men, right, back to discover exactly where Jesus could be found. And he says, come back and let me know so that I can worship him as well. It says all of Jerusalem was disturbed over this news. And you have to imagine that the news that reached the heads of those who perhaps were in positions of leadership in Jerusalem, what kind of disturbed them was probably the effect that they foresaw this was going to have on Herod. Because Herod was a very insecure leader, constantly known for, assassinating any kind of threat to his throne. He did it within his own family, killing his children, killing two of his wives. Herod was not a very good person. And history bears that out. The Jewish historian, Josephus, gives us insight into Herod and his family that is just, it's just a very disturbing story. And what do we read? We read that once Herod discovers that the Magi are not coming back, that they tricked him, which, by the way, all happened through the hand of God as he began to give insight to the Magi so that they would not go back, thereby protecting Joseph and Mary, giving them an opportunity to escape down into Egypt, a 150-mile journey, which they did in the evening. As soon as they heard, they packed up and left. And again, just as a side note, this is, again, another prophetic word, because this was written in Hosea chapter 11, where it says, out of Egypt I have called my son. And so all of this is part of God's, unfolding of his plan. But Herod's response to that was to send troops into Bethlehem and find any male child 2 years of age and under, and to kill him. What a heinous thing to do. And that also is part of this Christmas story. So I thought, what are the implications of this story for present day life? What do we think about that in terms of this day in which we are now? We find ourselves in 2021. And so I came across a passage that is found in Galatians chapter 5, verses 15 through 26. And if you have your Bibles, I'd invite you to turn to this passage, because it's a very interesting passage as we read, as we look at it. And what I'd like to do is just begin to underscore some of the truths that we're going to find here. When you read in this text in Galatians 5, I'll pick it up from verse 13, where it says, "You, my brothers, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge in the sinful nature. Rather, serve one another in love. The entire law is summed up in a single command: love your neighbor as yourselves." So you look at this passage and you see Paul, who is writing this letter to the Galatian Christians, is telling them that they were called to be free. This work that Jesus accomplishes on our behalf sets us free, but free from what? Free from our proclivity to follow our own sinful nature, apart from being able to follow God's will. See, this nature that we have inherited from Adam is a nature that brought with it this sense of judgment. So we find within ourselves now, in the world in which we're living, right, there is brokenness all around us, and we see it with the division, the hatred, the jealousies, the envies, all these sins that we see all around us, plus the mortality of our own bodies and the decay that we find in the creation that's all around us. And yet Jesus has come into the world. He says, "I have come to set you free." Jesus would say in the Gospel of John, "I have come that you might have life and have it more abundant." So this freedom that we were called to, it says, now that we've been set free, we are not to use this freedom just to continue to indulge our sinful nature. Rather, he says, we ought to be serving one another in love. So, picking it up in verse 16, this is what Paul says. Paul says, "I say to you, live by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the sinful nature." And then he gives you this contrast. Notice here in verse 17 of the text, he says, "For the sinful nature desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the human nature." They're in conflict with each other. And he says, "So that you do not do what you want." You see, what we learn here is that there is this contrast between the Spirit and the sinful nature. And if you take a closer look, it reveals really even the heart of the matter here, because the contrast is really between a desire for God's will, or actually the desire to gratify my own. See, that's why it goes on when you read in verse 16 of Galatians 5, it says, "Live by the Spirit." So this sense of having as the desire of one's heart is focused on the Spirit, which is really saying, my focus is on doing God's will. The Spirit has come to reveal to us the truth that Jesus has been proclaiming, so that as you would read in other places, like in the book of Romans in chapter 5, where he says, "My spirit bears witness." He says, "God's Spirit bears witness to my spirit that we are children of the Most High." So now this Spirit that God has placed into our life as a guarantee of this coming life that we're going to have with him for eternity. This Spirit now is calling us, has freed us to really step into this to following after desires of God. And he doesn't want us to be ignorant about this. He's saying that this pull of the Spirit in your life is actually in contrast to the pull of our own sinful nature. And so what this is really saying is that the way of the Spirit and the way of our sinful nature are in actuality in conflict. Isn't that what it says in the text? Look at the end of verse 17. He says, they are in conflict with each other. So doing one is putting you in a position that you're not going to fulfill the desire of the other. If I follow the ways of my sinful nature, he says, I'll never fulfill the desires of the Spirit. And consequently, if I choose to live by this Spirit, it says, I will not fulfill the desires of this sinful nature. So this conflict, it really is a tension. And that tension now has to be settled on where we are going to set our affection, right? What is going to really be that deciding voice in your life? So depending on where we have set our hearts and minds, whether it's our wills or God's, the outcomes are going to be very, very different. And the fruit that's produced by that as the result of where we place my desires is what the rest of this passage here in Galatians is really all about. But before we even go there and look at some of this fruit, I just want to reiterate just a few things. There is this desire for God's will or a desire to gratify my own. That is at the heart of what you see taking place in this life of Herod. Herod's all about Herod. When he hears the words that a king of the Jews has been born, what does he do? He begins to make decisions just to eliminate any kind of of conflict with this king of the Jews. Eliminate the competition, right? Make sure that he's the one who is left in control. And so all those actions that he's going to take, from being deceitful to lying, to manipulating people and circumstances, to ordering the troops to go down to Bethlehem, all of these things, where do they spring from? They spring from a heart that at its core is all about Herod. It's all about his power, his position, right? It's all about the political clout that he's able to wield at this moment. And so I want you to think about today is that when Galatians is calling us to live by the Spirit, and we will not gratify the desires of the sinful nature, there is this choice that is being placed between the two of us. Now, as we have seen, the implications of that is that we're placed in a position where God is beginning to say that the fruit that my life produces is going to truly reveal where my desires lie. The fruit my life produces reveals where my desires lie. Because what we're planting in our as the seedbed for our actions, they come from deep within. For Herod, it's obvious in the story that what motivated all of Herod's actions, it all had to do with his own selfish ambitions. It all had to do with jealousies and of what maybe others were doing. Everything was a matter of him exercising control. And the result of that, people lost their lives. The city was always in the sense of turmoil. That's why when people heard the news that a king of the Jews had been born, knowing Herod the way they did, all the city was troubled because they were just waiting to see what it is that Herod would do. So, my friends, you look at this text, and now you begin to recognize that if we paid attention to what's really driving my life, where my life is really being headed, that, my friends, is really one of the implications that we're going to drive from this story. Because the Christmas story was one to tell us that God has sent his Son into this world to bring us peace and hope and joy and love and freedom. And that freedom is found by the way in which we take the hand of the Spirit of God and allow him to lead and direct our life. How effective we are at that? Well, that's what we're going to take a look at next week. How do we know that we are truly living in this spirit? It may not be as hard as you think to discern that. I'm not saying that those choices are easy, because as we already discovered, there is this conflict between what I desire and what God desires. But God's saying, you follow me and you'll experience this freedom. And one day you'll experience this life in abundance. So think about that for today. Read through Galatians 5:16 through 26. And my friends, I hope that you will find much of what you need to continue to just fix your eyes on Jesus and to run this race of faith with greater endurance. So seize the day, and never forget that God is good all the time. We'll look and try and address this question about how we can experience this freedom that Jesus promised. God bless you. Look forward to our time tomorrow, Lord willing. God bless.